It's in the gun. It's Phil Friday. You know what that means. We're going to have Phil Steele joining us here shortly, breaking down the best games around college football and that matchup out in the desert between the Mountaineers and the Wildcats. All that coming up here on ITG.
You are now watching Believe.
ITG.
With special guest, Phil Steele.
Author of the College Football Bible.
You can see things before they happen.
Well, I definitely like West Virginia's offensive line.
All you got to do is bet on the winner and you'll never lose.
I like the Mountaineers to win this one.
Taylor, touchdown!
To me, the key matchup here is that West Virginia run game. Hey, a real pleasure being on. Thanks for having me on the In the Gun podcast.
Because once you enter this family, there's no getting out.
ITG 205. I'm Scott Callahan, and that is the signal caller, Jed Drenning. It's Phil Steele Friday. Obviously, every week here on In the Gun, we'll break down some of the best matchups around college football, including the Big 12, and of course, West Virginia, getting Phil's thoughts, one of the best minds in all of the business. So we'll get to him in just a second. Before we get into anything, a shout out to friends of the show, Bet Online. Bet Online is your number one source for all your betting needs. Bet Online, where the game starts, and of course, our friends at Toothman Ford, where we all know cars cost less in Grafton. A huge shout out to JR and his team down there. So, Jed, I believe you kind of teased me up a little bit there before we started recording and said that I did fairly well last week in our pick'ems, or in our picks. So let me know how I did and how you did in last week's game.
Yeah, you did fairly well, and I certainly didn't. Uh, Here's how they shook out. Prop bet number one last week because of the high scoring first quarter in 2022 when Kansas State was here. We played with the points and we said, will there be more than 47 combined points because 47 points were scored in the first quarter in 2022 in the game, Kansas State. Will there be more than 47 combined points scored in the entire game? The over-under hovered in the mid-50s. So both of us took yes. But I'll tell you what, it wasn't as comfortable as what we might have thought. The final was 38-18, 56 total points with a couple late touchdowns, right? So we both hit that one. That's the one I got. We focused one of the questions on DJ Giddens, who entered the game as the number 4 rusher in the country. He had eclipsed 100 yards rushing in 8 of his previous 10 games coming in. We said, will Giddens go over 100 yards versus West Virginia? You said no. I said yes. He ended up with 60, and that was a
Yeah,
deceiving 60
it was.
because he had, 9 yards at halftime. He had a couple late yards like on their final drive, which was curious, but he didn't come close to 100. They made their yards throwing the football, not rushing the football. So you hit that one, and I missed that one. And then we talked about the rushing quarterbacks and the matchup there. Now, this was something, I'll tell you what, there's a number that came out of this that I did not see coming. And the question was, we simply asked, which quarterback will rush for the most yards? The dynamic dual threat Avery Johnson or dual threat Garrett Green?
Yeah.
You picked Garrett. I picked Avery Johnson. I couldn't be more wrong. And here's why. Garrett rushed for 89 yards.
And a
Avery
half.
Johnson, Skyler, did not run the football once.
Yeah.
Once. 0 carries, 0 yards. They had that game plan with the quick pass game where he carved us up with that. But when you look at Garrett, going back to the Kansas game, his rushing output, 87 yards, 86 yards, 87 yards, 89 yards. Those are his last 4 games. The good news is Garrett has hit his stride in the ground game. The bad news is that was 48 carries in 4 games, and we're paying for it, which is why his situation is hanging in the balance in terms of whether he will play on Saturday because of the injury he sustained against Kansas State. So he has paid the price for that rushing production. But you hit 3 out of 3, and I was 1 out of 3 with those picks. But again, the Avery Johnson thing, wow, there's no way I would have picked him not to
No,
have a single carry. That
no.
is remarkable.
And then for Garrett to also outrush him and only play a half of the game. So
Yeah.
that shows that too. In those games that Garrett's had the 80 some yards, how many of them were he the leading rusher? Because it feels like he's led the team at least twice,
Well,
maybe
here's the
three.
thing, Scholar. He was the leading rusher in the game at large, not just for West
Yeah,
Virginia
yeah.
against Kansas State, but in the game overall. But Iowa State, he certainly was. Oklahoma State, I would have to check. Let me see, 86. I would need to look at that. I think he may have been against Oklahoma State because if I remember, didn't no, I
No,
take that
Jaheim
back.
White. Jaheim.
Jaheim had the big game. That's right, I take that back. And against Kansas, well, you know what? I could check real quick. Let's see what Jaheim. I don't think Jaheim did a lot against Kansas, and then I'll check CJ. No,
Yeah.
Jaheim. That's Jaheim. That's the game where he only had 15 yards. CJ against Kansas had 38, so he was the leading rusher against Kansas 3 of the 4 games. Yeah, so he's paying the price for that.
Yeah. I think Avery, and I'm not sure on this, maybe you have more insight on this, but I thought I had heard or seen something that he was a little banged up, and that's why that he didn't run as much as, or well, run at all really, compared to what they're used to running him. But either way, really good job by the West Virginia defense in terms of stopping the run. They've been pretty good at it all year, with the exception of the Kansas game, which that's going to happen. I mean, that's what Kansas does. They're that's their bread and butter. They're going to run it on everybody. But outside of that, I mean, they've held Ollie Gordon to 50 yards. They held DJ Giddens to 60 some odd yards. I mean, those are two of the best running back talents in the country. Now, I know Ollie's not had the year that maybe he anticipated, but that's pretty impressive stuff. Now, if you could just get the back end to kind of catch up a little bit, then you have something cooking there.
Well, one of the things I pointed out in the post-game show on Saturday night was some of the things West Virginia did to chop up its front and make DJ Giddens struggle and mitigate the damage he did. I'm quite certain future opponents for Kansas State, they're going to see some of what we did again.
Yeah.
And maybe they have a future opponent with a more fortified secondary that's going to emulate some of what we did and make DJ Giddens struggle, but really have more production on the back end and maybe find a way to knock off Kansas State because I think we put some good stuff on tape in terms of what to do against DJ Giddens when they try and run the ball. But yeah, like you said, that was disconnected from what we were able to do against the throw game because he kind of had his way against us, carving us up in the quick game, especially on those manageable third downs.
Yeah, and that secondary will sure be tested this weekend against Noah Fafita and Ted McMillan. We'll dive into that stuff here in just a bit. We're going to go ahead and take a quick break, and then on the other side, we'll bring in Phil Steele. One more shout out before we do so. Thank you to Fortis for roof performance and financial certainty guaranteed. Be sure to visit fortis.us.com. Hang tight. On the other side, we'll have Phil Steele.
For nearly 20 years, Fortis has been the nation's leader in providing guaranteed roof performance programs for commercial buildings. Fortis offers roof performance solutions that feature extensive initial and ongoing reconditioning for commercial buildings as an alternative to traditional replacement, with long-term performance guarantees that are backed by global leader Lloyd's of London. Fortis offers a comprehensive range of roof performance management programs that provide financial security, extend the life of our customers' roofs, and make a significant impact on ROI. Fortis is currently improving performance and increasing ROI for customers at more than 4,800 locations, with more than 140 million square feet protected, including many Fortune 500 companies that have turned to Fortis to save money, gain financial certainty, and extend the life of their existing roofs. Fortis has helped customers save more than $520 million in capital roof replacement costs for an average ROI of over 250%. To learn more, visit fortis.us.com. Fortis, roof performance and financial certainty guaranteed.
Nobody supports the blue and gold Mountaineers like Toothman Ford. With over 20 NIL deals and counting, Toothman Ford continues to rally behind our student athletes. And it's time we rally and support the dealer that supports the Mountaineers. Not only does Toothman Ford offer the best prices in the state on pre-owned, their never over MSRP campaign on new Fords guaranteed to save you thousands. Drive with pride all season long, knowing you're supporting the dealer that fuels our Mountaineers. Toothman Ford, where cars cost less, in Grafton and at toothmanford.com.
Back in the gun with Phil Steele. It's time to break down some of the best games in all of college football, top 25, Big 12, and of course, West Virginia, Arizona. Phil, thanks for joining us back here again on ITG, and go ahead and feel free to pump anything you got going this week.
Yeah, I appreciate that as always. And once again, right up, go to philsteele.com, go to the front menu, and just click on the Phil Steele Plus tour. Take the tour. It's on YouTube. Make sure you subscribe. That way you get notified when it's up. But it's up right now. 5 selections, 4 quick hitters for you, and it's all absolutely free. Give you a quick show of what's available on Phil Steele Plus, but more importantly, give you some free winners. Take the tour today. You just go to philsteele.com and click on the Phil Steele Plus tour.
All right, Phil, well, we're going to go and start with some top 25 action. It's Notre Dame and Navy. And I don't think anyone saw this being a big time game, maybe before the season started, but the midshipmen, one of the 2 academies that are having special seasons this year so far, Notre Dame, seemingly like has kind of rebounded and been in cruise control for the most part since that early season loss to Northern Illinois. Do you find a scenario here where Navy can find a way to come out with a win here? I know it's the triple option's a difficult beast to defend. Do they have enough to get the win?
I've been very impressed with Navy this year. I love the new offense that they're running under Chronic, and it's different. It opens it up a little bit. They're running, take it under center. You could take the shotgun snaps. They run some wing T. They've adapted the passing offense as well. So it's a tough offense to digest. But I like Marcus Freeman, and I like the fact that in the history of Notre Dame playing Navy, at least since 1997, Navy's been ranked once, and that really caught Notre Dame's attention that year. Notre Dame was only a 7.5-point favorite. They ended up winning that game 52-20. There's no doubt they have the athletic edge on both sides of the line of scrimmage and the talent edge across the board. I also like the way that they've prepared for the option. Now, granted, this year's option is a little different than the last 2 years, but the last 2 times they played Navy, go back to the game in Baltimore. They led that one 35-13 in 2022, and then all of a sudden went to sleep in the second half. That'll help them here because Freeman will remind them they went to sleep in the second half and ended up almost losing. And then last year they played the game in Ireland. Notre Dame just absolutely crushed them 42-3. I think Freeman will have a good plan against the option. He's got the athletic talent. They'll be well prepared because Navy's undefeated and ranked, and everybody's giving him a great shot. I like Notre Dame to win this one by more than the 2 touchdowns.
Phil, you got number 20 Illinois on the road at number 1 Oregon. Another fascinating matchup. Illinois had their way with Michigan. Luke Altmaier struggled, but the run game bailed them out. They ran for 187 yards against the Wolverines. Very impressive on the ground. And they're on the road against an Oregon team. People keep trying to find reasons to count Oregon out. They were supposed to have a hangover game on the road at Purdue. They took care of business after the big win against Ohio State, but they're laying 3 touchdowns at home against Bielema and his crew. How do you see this unfolding?
Yeah, I love the job that Brett Bielema is doing. You go back to last year, Illinois struggled defensively after being dominant defensively the year before. And, Illinois was completely under the radar coming into the year. But I think in year 2, Aaron Henry as the defense coordinator has got it going. They're holding opponents to 16 yards below their season average. Luke Altmaier's been the big difference. So last year he was a turnover machine. He had 13 touchdowns, 10 interceptions. This year he's got a 15-1 ratio, so you got to love that. A lot of good advantages going for Illinois, but I like Oregon in this one. Now, last week I thought Purdue would keep it under the number because of the situation, and Oregon just crushed them. Now you take a look at the fact that Illinois last week, coming after the game was over, Brett Bielema said, you don't beat Michigan preparing 7 days for them. You prepare 365 days for them. That tells me this is a letdown spot, and you don't want to go into Autzen Stadium on a letdown spot. Keep in mind, Oregon led Michigan State 31-0. Could have led UCLA 35-0. This is a dominant Oregon team, and I think they catch Illinois off a massive home game, the biggest game of the year for them, and now having to travel. I'll take Oregon minus the points here.
A big one in the SEC, Mizzou on the road at Alabama. The Crimson Tide kind of in an unfamiliar spot here with 2 losses already this season. 2 of their last 3 games have resulted in losses. So obviously some confidence maybe shaking a little bit down there. But Missouri's kind of stumbling into this one, Phil. It sounds like Brady Cook is doubtful for this one. So if it is Drew Pine, it seems like a massive uphill battle for Mizzou on the road, doesn't it?
And I think when you look at Missouri, they're a team that's ranked, and came into the season number 11 in the country in the AP poll, but a lot of that's because of the schedule. I don't think it's overwhelming talent on the Missouri side of the ball. You look at who they've beaten so far this year, and even some of the games. I mean, Vanderbilt could easily have beaten them if they made a field goal at the end of regulation. Auburn had the big lead on them last week. Boston College had a lead in the first half. Other than that, they beat Buffalo, Murray State. I've been sort of nonplussed with Missouri all year. Nate Noel is probably not going to play for Missouri, the running back. And then you look with Alabama. They're a team that has not been impressive ever since the first half against Georgia. But I think we're going to see the Alabama team that we saw in the first half against Georgia. They're angry. They've got 2 losses in the last 3 weeks. They did lead Tennessee at the half last week, and that's a tough environment to go into. And the last time Missouri traveled on the road against a tough foe was this year. They just got absolutely dominated by Texas A&M. I see more of the same here. I like Bama to win this one comfortably.
All right, Phil, you got number 5 Texas on the road at a suddenly ranked number 25 Vandy. First time they've been ranked
Huh.
in quite some time. Texas as an 18 and a half or so point favorite coming off that loss to Georgia. Meanwhile, with Vandy, the curious case of Vanderbilt continues this season. Is it the Vandy team that beat Alabama, or is it the Vandy team that lost to Georgia State or struggled against Ball State? Phil, was Texas caught looking ahead last week against Georgia to this Vandy game?
That's a great question, Jed. I love it. I tell you what, Texas is going to be a little angry coming off that loss. I mean, they had at the half against Georgia, they had 38 yards offense, so they've got to have a much better game here. But there is no way I'm going against Vanderbilt. Now, the common denominator to the 2 worst efforts this year, Ball State and Georgia State, big favorite. Vanderbilt's in its role now as big dog, and Diego Pavia is a guy that just does tremendously well in this role. He's a gutsy quarterback. He's an ex-wrestler. He's running for 470 yards, hitting 66% of his passes with 11-1 ratio. And Vandy's coming in thinking they're going to win this game. I mean, they beat Alabama. They beat Kentucky on the road. So I think even though Texas will have the crowd edge here in Nashville, they'll have more fans than Vanderbilt will. Pavia, I think, keeps it closer than expected. So normally, every other year, I'd be taking Texas off a loss to win big with the crowd edge in Vanderbilt, but I'm just not going against this Vanderbilt team with Diego Pavia.
I love it. Vandy football being good is good for college football, right? So,
I agree. I agree. I love the job Clark Lee's doing too.
yes, absolutely. Sticking in the SEC, it's another massive showdown between a pair of 6-1 teams, LSU at Texas A&M. Both opened their season with a loss and have been red hot ever since. LSU may be a little bit more impressive, but A&M just keeps finding ways to win games too. Who do you think leaves this game pretty happy?
Yeah, and I think when you look at the game statistically, all my numbers, all my computer rankings and things like that, as an example, in SEC play, Texas A&M is plus 87 yards per game. LSU's actually only plus 31 yards per game. You go back to the Mississippi game, they were outgained in that one. The South Carolina game, I thought South Carolina probably should have been up more on them. But last week, LSU had its most impressive game of the season. I liked Arkansas last week, and LSU was in control of that game, start to finish, 34-10. Then you look at A&M, and I thought it might have been a little bit of a flat spot for A&M last week. And then I thought, okay, they were up. They probably let up a little bit. No, I watched the game against Mississippi State, and it was pretty even throughout. Mississippi State actually down by 7, had the ball a couple of times, ended up with a first down yardage edge in the game. But A&M's tough to beat at home. I think the home team has actually won 7 in a row in this series. And the Aggies have the defensive edge. They're holding opponents to 87 yards per game below their season average, number 19 in the country. And I like the way that Le'Veon Moss is running the ball. So I think A&M at home is almost impossible to beat. They've shown it in the years past. I'm going to lean a little bit with A&M here, but it's scary because LSU was so impressive last week.
Well, let's jump into the Big 12. You've got BYU coming off an emotionally charged come from behind win against Oklahoma State. What a thriller that was at the end. On the road at UCF. Last week, with a quarterback change, UCF went into Jack Trice Stadium and did something you don't do against the John Heacock defense. They ran for 354 yards. I was all proud of myself thinking that, hey, I'm going to take UCF as my upset of the week. And then I look, UCF's favored at home against unbeaten number 11 BYU. What do you see playing out in Orlando?
Yeah, good situation for UCF. They come into this thing 0-4 their last four games, but it's not like they're being dominated on the field. In fact, they're plus 100 yards per game this year. As you talked about, I thought Ja'Cory Brown gave them a much more mobile quarterback. KJ sort of lumbering this year, and I like the way Ja'Cory Brown runs it, RJ Harvey, and it's in Bright House Stadium. BYU has been fortunate this year to be undefeated, I think. Oklahoma State probably should have beat them last week. The couple of fourth downs on that last drive, and they get the late touchdown to win. So it is a really good situation for UCF. I agree with you. I was hoping to get UCF as a dog in this game. Surprised they're a little bit of a favorite, but I guess Vegas knows a thing or two as well. I probably lean with UCF to win this game outright.
Speaking of Oklahoma State, they are on the road at Baylor this week. The Bears kind of felt like their season was kind of hanging in the balance. They were 2-4. It felt like they really needed a win desperately, and they were able to get that in a big way last week in Lubbock. And if you watch that first half, that was kind of a wacky start to the game with all the things that happened there, and they were able to get a pretty comfortable lead and just kind of run with it there in the second half. Feels like Baylor, if they win this game, maybe, who knows, maybe they turned their season around. So it feels weird to say Oklahoma State's going to potentially lose five straight. So, Phil, is it going to happen?
Yeah, I lean with Baylor in this one. Last week my computer was telling me Baylor over Texas Tech, Baylor over Texas Tech, and I'm like, I don't know. I just saw Baylor get dominated by Iowa State. They got beat by BYU at home. They blew that Hail Mary against Colorado. Why does my computer like Baylor? And then final score 59-35. All right, I see it. And you look at Oklahoma State this year, I think the big difference, and Jed pointed it out 2 weeks ago when West Virginia played them, is their defensive front seven's banged up, and it shows in the yards per game rush. They're giving up 238 yards per game on the ground, 5.7 yards per carry. In fact, in conference play, almost 300 yards per game on the ground, 6.4 yards per carry. So I think Baylor will be able to exploit that. They've got the much better defense, holding opponents to 14 yards below their season average. Oklahoma State's allowing 117 above. I got to think that this is a game that gets Baylor's season turned around and gets Dave Aranda and company rolling. So I like the Bears minus the points in this one.
And meanwhile, Phil, you've got a Texas Tech team kind of reeling after a blowout loss at home to Baylor that Skylar just mentioned on the road against TCU. And don't look now, but TCU's kind of one win away from people really starting to take them seriously. Texas Tech, last place pass defense in the Big 12. Josh Hoover kind of humming, throwing the football for the Frogs. This looks kind of like a take the over game at 66.5. But what do you see playing out with Texas Tech on the road at TCU?
Yeah, it should be a high scoring game. Any game Texas Tech's involved in should be high scoring, except for that Arizona game 2 weeks ago. But Hoover 16-6 ratio. And TCU's had a couple of head scratching games this year. The blown lead against UCF. Remember, they were up big in that game. And then the Houston game where you just go, really? They just lost to Houston and pretty much got controlled in that game. Other than that, they've had a pretty good season. The SMU game was a bunch of turnovers. And the Utah game last week, going on the road and beating Utah on the road with a 20-12 first down advantage, is very impressive. So it's a dangerous TCU team. As you pointed out, Texas Tech, you really don't know what to expect. You go back to the Washington State game, they didn't have Taj Brooks. Taj Brooks has played, and they've done pretty well until last week against Baylor. So over might be your best play here, but I also like TCU to win this one.
Utah and Houston, and Phil, this one seems like it could be a bit of a snoozer. Is this one just one of those first ones to score wins this game? Because I don't know that either offense is going to show up for this one.
Yeah, you got two really good defenses, and here's a surprising number for you. Houston comes in 2-5 on the year, so they're a poor team, right? Well, guess what? Their defense is holding opponents to 144 yards below their season average. That's number 4 in the country. So if you come in averaging 400 yards, they're going to hold you to 256 yards. That's how good the defense is playing. Utah, same thing. Great defense, holding opponents to 95 below. Both offenses struggling. Zion Chris was banged up last week against Kansas, so we wonder about his health for this one. Donovan Smith has been disappointing this year with a 4.8 ratio. In fact, their quarterbacks have a 5.10 ratio. And this is a Houston team that got shut out by Cincinnati, shut out by Iowa State, and could have been shut out by UNLV in the opener. Only put together 14 points last week against Kansas. So I like Utah to get this one at home, but I think you summed it up properly. I think my computer had this one like 16-6. It'll be a low-scoring game.
Meanwhile, the battle of the Sunflower State with Kansas at 2-5 finally got off the schneid a bit with that win last week against number 16 Kansas State in the Little Apple. Is this one of those situations, Phil, that you can kind of toss everything out because it is a rivalry game?
Not in this situation, because Kansas State, ever since Bill Snyder took over, Kansas State has just dominated this series. And I think right now they're on a 14, let me see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. They've won the last 15 games straight up in the series. Wow. So Kansas State just dominates this series year in and year out. Now, last year, I will say, Kansas had a backup quarterback in there, a third-string quarterback in Cole Ballard, and actually played Kansas State closer than I expected, 31-27. I do think Kansas is an under-the-radar team right now because you look at their 5 losses, and they were much better in all 5 games. They had a chance of winning each of those 5, so they could have a much better record right now. But Kansas State's an outstanding home favorite. They've dominated the series, and I think they're the better team, especially on the defensive side of the ball. So I like K-State minus the points to get the 16th straight win in this series.
Bill, this is an interesting one out in Boulder. Cincinnati and Colorado, both 5-2, and it feels like the winner of this game will really cement themselves as a Big 12 contender heading into the month of November. But Cincinnati is just, I think a lot of people are hesitant with them because of the teams that they've played. It hasn't been pretty. Colorado, people are still hesitant with them because we saw the hot start last year and then only for them to fall apart in the second half of the season. But this is a true opportunity for one of these two teams to stick their foot in the ground. How do you see this one going?
Well, I tell you, Cincinnati's been sort of a money machine for me. I just keep playing them every week. They keep covering every week, so I love that. And Colorado has impressed me. I will say that. At the start of the year, I said Colorado probably won't make a bowl game. Well, they impressed me last week against Arizona, just dominated that game, 398-245. They give Kansas State a great game at home. They went into UCF and came out of there with a big win. I think their season turned around on that Hail Mary pass against Baylor. That might have been the one play that turned their season around. Lose that game, maybe they go into the tank a little bit and don't do as well. But winning that game seems to have given them some energy. So it's tough to go against Colorado at home, but they are laying 5.5. And I think Cincinnati is still a way under the radar team. Nobody's really talking about them. I like the way that Brandon Sorsby's throwing the football. Kiner's running the ball well, as is Pryor, and the defense playing well. I like Cincy plus the points to potentially pull the upset here.
Okay, Phil, let's head to the desert. First ever matchup between West Virginia and Arizona on the gridiron. I'm a little surprised with both teams being as banged up as they are. Some things are still in question that there's even a line on this game, to be honest with you. It's a difficult game to peg. Meanwhile, West Virginia quietly has the number 1 rushing defense on the road in the entire country because teams, in large measure, have had success throwing the football against the Mountaineers. West Virginia allowing over 9 yards per pass attempt. Meanwhile, you have an Arizona offense that's still trying to get humming. Noah Fafita not quite where everybody expected him. T. McMillan putting up numbers, but not quite where he was last year. What do you see shaking out in this first ever matchup between the Mountaineers and the Wildcats?
Yeah, and I'm disappointed in the outcome last week for West Virginia. I liked West Virginia over Kansas State, and I thought they played a really good first half, 12-5 first downs. They got banged up and beaten in the second half, so it was very disappointing for me. Do you look at the quarterback situation? I don't know if Garrett Green's going to play or not. I do like what I saw to Nico against Texas Tech last year. I used West Virginia in that game, and they delivered the win. He's going back to Arizona. That's a nice plus for him. And I have just been nonplussed with Arizona all year. You go back to the opening game against New Mexico. They gave up 305 yards in the first half and only led by 3. They trailed Northern Arizona at the half. The Kansas State game, Kansas State obliterated them after the first drive. Arizona scored on the first drive. After that, it was all Kansas State, 31-7. You look at the Utah game, Utah had 3 long drives for 3 points, and that was really the key to them winning on the road. Then Texas Tech beat them, BYU crushed them, Colorado crushed them. As you touched on, everybody expected big things from Noah Fafita. He's got 9 touchdown passes, 10 interceptions this year. It is pretty much been a sort of a one-dimensional offense as of late. So I think West Virginia is a better team. Even banged up as Arizona is. They've lost a couple of key players for the season. I think West Virginia can go on the road and get the win here.
Bill, I'm right there with you. I think regardless of quarterback, I for some reason I really like this matchup for WVU. We'll see if that's how it plays out. We'll take one more bigger look here at the rest of the schedule. Obviously, the bye week coming up. We've mentioned it a couple of times here with you. The schedule seems to somewhat feel a little bit more favorable down the stretch, even though Baylor's probably better than what we expected. Cincinnati's better than what we expected. Texas Tech has had some good wins as well. But with this team playing the way it has the last 2 weeks, do you look at that situation and just say that was just 2 better teams, they're ranked opponents, and that's just separate from what we're going to see down the stretch? Or do you feel like that's a precursor to what's to come?
No, I think they just took on 2 of the best teams in the Big 12, no doubt about it. And as mentioned, they showed in the first half. I mean, you don't give up the interception for a touchdown. You score on at the goal line at the end of the half. It's a completely different game. I think they go into the locker room with some momentum. They had a 12-5 first down edge, a 231 52-yard edge. So they proved that they belong with the big boys. They just played 2 of the big ones and didn't have the breaks go their way, especially injury-wise in the second half against Kansas State. So I think West Virginia is very capable of finishing off this season strong.
Well, there you have it. Phil Steele, one of the best out there. Make sure you go find his stuff, subscribe to his YouTube channel. Phil, we appreciate you for joining us once again here on ITG.
Yeah, a lot of fun as always, guys. You guys traveling out to Arizona this week?
I am. We're actually flying out of Pittsburgh. We normally fly to Clarksburg, but because it's a longer trip and the fuel situation dictates, we got to bus up to Pittsburgh to fly out, and then we'll fly back to the Bridgeport Airport. So interesting trip.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, have yourself a safe flight there, Jed.
Will do. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Phil. And we'll have Phil back next week for the bye week as well. Even though there is no West Virginia game, we'll still get his thoughts on some of the other matchups around the league and the country. So, Phil Steele, everyone, make sure you hit that subscribe button on his YouTube channel as well. And hang tight. When we come back, we'll make our picks for this week's game.
There are better-known tractors in the world than Coyote. Ones with bigger names, longer histories, more popular hats, cute toy lines. But there's not a single tractor ever been built that's better equipped to do the dirty work. So we'll just focus on what really matters. Coyote, we dig dirt.
Now at Johnston Equipment, get 0% financing for 72 months, plus a free loader on select Coyote models in stock. Visit us on Route 33 between Weston and Buchanan.
Back in the gun, it's time to make our picks for this weekend's game. Before we do, though, one final thank you to Johnston Equipment. Get 0% financing for up to 72 months with approved credit on select Coyote tractors in stock now at Johnston Equipment, Route 33 between Weston and Buchanan. As we mentioned in the open, I went 3-0 last week. Probably not going to happen this week, but we'll give it a shot. Jed, what do you got for us on the ITG Sports Book?
Our ITG prop bets. All right. It wouldn't be a West Virginia-Arizona game if we didn't talk turnovers. WVU has committed 12 in 7 games, but forced only 5. Arizona has forced 11, but has committed 15 in 7 games, tied for most in the Big 12. So, on the topic of ball security, let's do an over-under on combined turnovers in this game. Over-under 3.5 combined turnovers in this game. You got the over, you got the under.
I mean, I gotta lean over. I don't feel great about it, but because West Virginia's defense hasn't forced many turnovers, even if Fafita seems to gift wrap them every week. But I gotta lean over. If Nico plays, I feel like he's got to have some mistake in there somewhere. I don't know how many, but you got to feel like there's going to be one. And Fafita's probably going to put the ball at risk at least a couple of times. So I'll go over, but not necessarily feeling good about it.
Well, if you look at it, what I did was I took the 27 combined turnovers between the two teams. And if you divide it out by 7
Yeah.
games, it's almost 4 a game. But again, you got to factor in West Virginia has a turnover drought defensively. Arizona, not so much. So there's 16 combined takeaways. I'm going to go over. I'm going to go over for the same reason. Our quarterback situation to be determined, but if in fact it's Nico, it's not to say he won't make some things happen heading back home to his old environs and stomping grounds in Arizona. But it's tough to step in under those circumstances and not make a mistake or two. If it's Nico, and for that matter, if it's Garrett, it's tougher to play on the road anyway.
Yeah.
So I'm going to lean toward the over with that. Now let's go on to prop bet number 2. You heard me mention to Phil. West Virginia kind of quietly leads the nation in rush defense on the road. We're only allowing 57 rush yards per game on the road. Arizona averaging 136 rush yards per game overall, but 155 at home. A lot of dynamics to consider with this prop bet. Will Arizona rush for 100 or more yards? Yes or no?
No. I like West Virginia's run defense. They've time and time again stepped up to deliver. They held Ollie Gordon to 50. They held DJ Giddens to 60. I don't think that that's where Arizona's going to make their hay. And that front seven's done really well. I think that they're going to continue to play well. Obviously, we've already talked about Arizona's offensive line situation, and they're going to look at this secondary and probably just start salivating. So I'm going to say under, and it's going to have to be for them Noah Fafita just carving up that secondary.
I know that's going to be their plan. If I'm them, I'm coming out and I'm going some 1 and 2 tight end looks, and I'm protecting Fafita. I'm helping that struggling left tackle, and kind of just trying to carve us up with him making some reads downfield. But part of what we're going to have to do is account for Ted McMillan, and when you do that, that means you got to remove some resources from
Yep.
the box. So there are going to be some opportunities. Look, 100 yards for a team rush total, that's not a real chunky total. Case in point, last week we did, very solid against the run in K-State because of what happened in the late going, still ran for 116. I think that despite the fact he'll come in wanting to throw, I would imagine, against this West Virginia secondary, they find a way to eclipse by a little the 100-yard rushing mark. So I'll say yes to make it interesting. I'll say yes.
The
Arizona
other
finds a way to.
The
What's
other
that?
part I would say too is Quali Conley is a pretty good receiving back, so that'll be
Yeah.
another way that they can get him the football without having to run it into the teeth of that defense. But I wouldn't be shocked either. Like I think that's a pretty fair number at 100.
He's one of the most targeted guys on the offense. But okay, let's move on to question number 3. Now we're going to go 2 parts with this one. If you're playing Arizona, you got to have a Ted McMillan question, right? So
Yeah.
let's focus on Ted McMillan, and we're going to have a couple questions here. Their stud wide receiver. He leads the Big 12 with 111 receiving yards per game. Despite all this focus on him, he's still productive. He scored 4 touchdowns in the opener, but hasn't scored one in the 6 games since. So he's kind of due. It's
Yeah.
not as if they're not trying to feed him. West Virginia, meanwhile, is 15th in the Big 12 against the pass. So we're going to go with a 2-part question for number 3, prop bet number 3. Part 1, will McMillan surpass his 111-yard receiving
Mm.
average in this game? Because, again, West Virginia must necessarily game plan to bracket him and mitigate the damage he will do. He's averaging 111. Will he, if you look at it, it's kind of top heavy, Skylar. He's had, from a yardage standpoint, he's had 3 really big games, and the other 4 have been way below that average.
Yeah.
So what's going to play out here? Another really big game? Or is it one of those other games where he's below that average? Do you see him hitting the 111 or beyond. Because if you want to look at it more specifically, I can give you the numbers.
Yeah.
Uh, Again, four or three really big games. In other words, 304 against New Mexico,
That's just insane.
138 against K State, 161 against Texas Tech. Now, in the other games, 11 yards, Northern Arizona, 50, 76, 78, 38. So three really chunky games, four pretty light games for that 111 average. What do you see happening? Does he get his 111 average or more?
Unfortunately, I think he does, but I'll give him a little bit more context to it. Colorado last week, they were able to play some man against them, and they can do some more things defensively than West Virginia can. And if you look at the games that he's had less than 100 yards, besides Northern Arizona, Utah usually pretty good defense. BYU's been playing really well. Colorado, as I mentioned, and then the games where he's kind of broken out. Texas Tech, one of the worst pass defenses in the league. Kansas State's towards the bottom as well. They were 15th, I believe, in the Big 12 in pass defense entering the West Virginia game. And of course, New Mexico. I mean, it's New Mexico. So I think it's pretty congruent with the numbers. I think he's going to have a big game and against a pass defense that's really struggling. So I'll go over.
I'm going to have to go over as well. Again, Aubrey Burks isn't playing, and what that does is
Big loss.
that takes some of your versatility away
Yeah.
defensively. So it takes some of your options away. Um, so you're going to be a little more pressed in terms of being one extreme or the other. And yeah, I think that you're going to have to give up something. And despite the fact that you will game plan to try and bracket him and take him away, you also don't want them gashing you in the run game. And there's other options in this offense for Noah Fafita to take advantage of. When you look at Lamonius Craig on the other side, they got a solid tight end. So you can't just go wholesale and do nothing but try and take McMillan away. You just have to kind of mitigate or minimize the damage that he does to you. I'm going to say yes, he finds a way to get over that 111-yard average. I haven't seen a reason to believe otherwise out of the West Virginia secondary so far. And then part number two of question number three, will McMillan snap the streak and catch a touchdown on Saturday? Again, four in the opener, 6 consecutive games without one. So that's something to kind of take a look at. What do you think is going to play out there? Will he score a touchdown? We just both said he'll go over 111, but it's going to be 111 between the 20s. Or what type of game do you see unfolding in terms of that?
I I I think he does get one. Maybe it's just because I had my West Virginia Arizona college football 25 game the other night and he scored on me. So I guess I'll go with the one there. He snaps a streak. He's too good of a player to be held out of the end zone for that long. And if there's somebody you're going to do it against, and I hate to say it, but it's probably this secondary. So I don't know, but I think he finds a way. I'll give him one.
Killing me. I should have gone first because I'd have said yes, but now I got to say no just to be different. If you look at Fafita's red zone numbers, and that's not to say he's confined to the red zone because he can always hit a big play against you and score too. But let's look at his numbers inside the 20. He's a 57% passer, 5 of his touchdowns. So more than half of his touchdowns have come in the red zone. But again, I'm going to say no just to keep it interesting, but that's tough to do. It's almost like the old adage: if you're facing Tony Gwynn, would you
Yeah.
rather face Tony Gwynn when he's on a 22 game hit streak, or would you
Yes.
rather face him when he's 0 for his last 13? Well,
22 game hit streak.
yeah, that's what I'm saying. 0 for 13. I want no part of Tony Gwynn, and 0 for his last 6 and getting to the end zone, a player like McMillan, that is a tough challenge. But again, to keep it interesting, I'll say no. So that sums it up for this week's ITG prop bets, West Virginia, Arizona edition.
Yeah, let's just hope he doesn't have, one of those games where he makes up for all the scoreless games that he's had and has a New Mexico type game where he goes for 304 touchdowns. That will not end well for the Mountaineers. So we'll see how it all plays out in Tucson in the desert. Of course, Jed's going to be heading out there soon, so we'll see how that all plays out. We'll be back early next week to recap it all. But make sure you hit that subscribe button here on our YouTube page. Go to our X account. Take part in the
let me say this.
Yeah.
To have a 304-yard game. Look, I've been coaching when our receiver had a 300-yard game.
Yeah.
And what that takes is obviously throughout the course of the game, the defense is selling its soul to adjust to that guy. So you're going to have to overcome a lot of looks. And this was Chris George that did this for us at Glenville. So he had the talent to overcome all those adjustments, all those looks, all that bracket coverage. And obviously a guy like that just speaks to his ability.
Yeah.
It's not as though they were trying to not stop him. No, I mean, despite all those efforts, they still had no answers. So this is a legit checks all the boxes, receiver and weapons. So I just wanted to point that out. 300 yards.
Yeah.
Let's not gloss that over.
That's no joke.
For a receiver to do that, you have to overcome a lot of challenging looks in terms of what the defense is trying to do to you. He very obviously has the ability to do that, but continue with the close. I just kind of wanted to insert that there.
And don't forget, we've seen it with our own eyes too, a steady. I mean, that was an impressive day for him too, and one that feels like it was forever ago, but what an impressive day that he had against Baylor. But yeah, make sure you take part in our pick'ems. You can find that on our Twitter page, X account, whatever we want to call it, and see how we do. Nobody got a single pick last week. In terms of the fans, none of us got it except for Wes. So we've got to have somebody come up with a win this week so we can get Wes, coming down from his little self-confidence there. But make sure you take part. We'll be back early next week. And as always, be an ear and tell an ear about your favorite WVU football podcast. You've been in the gun.
ITG.
The fun doesn't have to stop here.
Be sure to hit subscribe and never miss an episode.
If you have any questions, suggestions, or feedback,
be sure to follow us on X at In the Gun Podcast.
Join us again next time.
Until then,
tell an ear to tell an ear about your new favorite WVU football podcast.
This mission is over. It's over.